It's baffled scholars for 2 millennia. It is a puzzle made of multi-dimensional elements, an enigma with roots that reach back to the dawning of time, perhaps before. Daniel explained part of it. Ezekiel and Isaiah had glimpses into it. John saw it all for the time of the end. That time is now. Join Derek and Sharon Gilbert on a journey that spans the course of history, from Eden to Mount Hermon, from Hermon to Babel, from Babel to Rome, from Rome to the cross, and from there to us. Biblical prophecy is coming true before your eyes, and to understand it, you must discern the times both then and now. It's time to unravel the threads of this all-encompassing prophetic paradox. It's time to unravel Revelation. Welcome to Unraveling Revelation. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I am Sharon Gilbert, and welcome to our, family room, studio. Not a family room. This is G1, isn't it?
Studio G1.
Studio G1.
This is the beating heart of our media empire.
You know what?
The sitting room off our master bedroom.
We've talked about this before on PID Radio, and I think we may have mentioned it on here. We have a project that we'll tell you about after the break called Build Barn Better. That will mean that we no longer record in here. We actually have a studio,
yes,
a real one.
A dedicated space out in the pole barn, which is fine because...
it's a great space, and it's going to be finished on the inside. So HVAC, whole thing, brand new windows.
Right. So we'll tell you about that after the break, and that will really be getting underway in earnest because as you're watching this, we will be returning from Israel this week. And so now we can finally get busy about, I can get busy sorting through the stuff that's out there, decide what we need to donate to get it out of the way.
And we can make the birds happy because they've been very upset that we've been gone for 3 weeks, and the raccoons and everybody who comes around our yard, and the hummingbirds. We'll get back just in time to hang those feeders.
We may find out that they launched a bank robbery into the garage to get into the trash cans holding the black oil sunflower seeds.
Not the hummingbirds, because they really don't do that. No. But yes, the raccoons.
The raccoons and possibly the voles, yes.
We don't know. But we're in Israel and we're having a great time. But coming back, so next week we'll tell you that we've been there. Because we're recording all 4 of these Mike Heiser programs on February 14th, which is Valentine's Day, of course, but it's also Mike Heiser's birthday.
Yes, Mike, 60 years old on February 14th. And
he's younger than you are.
Yeah. Such an honor to have been blessed by his work. He has shared it so willingly through his website, through his willingness to be interviewed by a couple of people operating with 2 tin cans and a string, which is how we started our podcast 18 years ago. And that changed not just our view of the Bible, but it really changed the course of our lives, because we wouldn't be doing this if we hadn't understood what Mike was teaching, which was really getting us back into the worldview of the prophets and the apostles.
Absolutely. I would say that Mike Heiser and Tom Horn together totally changed our ministry.
Yeah, I would agree. I'd add Elie Marzulli into that as well.
You know what? Elie Marzulli, his book was the first one you read about Watchers.
Yeah, the Nephilim. And that was a novel because that was the only book that had any reference at all to the Nephilim in our local library branch in St. Louis.
He'd heard about it at our church because he wasn't raised in a church that taught it.
Yeah. I mean, at the age of, 35, I finally heard about the Nephilim in a preached in church.
And your head spun on your shoulders.
Yeah, so those giants were real? And you're like, well, yeah. So anyway, L.A., Tom, and Mike especially, we thank you for that. And we mentioned last week the blessing of being able to travel with Mike and his wife Drina to Israel back in 2018.
So much fun.
And seeing Mike teach on the slope of Mount Hermon, teaching at the Jordan River, and also explaining the importance of the land of Bashan, which in the ancient world, as you mentioned last week, is a name that means place of the serpent.
It's a cognate to Bathan, which definitely means place of the serpent. But even in the Bible, you see that sh pronunciation compared to the th pronunciation.
Shibboleth or Sibboleth. Yeah,
yes, that's how they knew if you were an enemy or not.
Right. But most of us today don't really understand the significance of that region and why that was so important, why Mount Hermon, which towers over the ancient land of Bashan, was so important. We see references in Scripture, for example, in Psalm 22, where that's the messianic prophecy where the Messiah is surrounded by. I'm going to read
the
this
bulls
here.
of Bashan.
Right.
Yes.
So I want to read this so I'm not depending on my memory. Psalm 22, verse 12, and of course this is the messianic prophecy that begins with the verses that Jesus spoke on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? Verse 12, many bulls encompass me, strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me like a ravening and roaring lion. There are also references to the fat cows of Bashan in the book of Amos.
I know. These weren't, traditional cattle.
No. The typical explanation is that Bashan was a region that was famous for its livestock, but it turns out that's actually not the case. There was a scholar recently by the name of Dr. Robert D. Miller II, giving credit where it's due. The paper is got a brilliant title, The Bales of Bashan.
I know, I love it. I wish I'd written that.
Yeah. He actually combined archaeology, etymology, agronomy, soil samples, to show that ancient Bashan was a terrible place to raise cattle. There were no bulls of Bashan back in the day. You could not grow enough grass to feed cattle. You could have flocks of goats, flocks of sheep. That's fine.
It's a volcanic plain.
Right. You would not grow enough grass to supply to keep a herd of cattle alive.
You would not. And besides, why would there have been a bunch of cattle surrounding the cross?
Right.
No.
Yeah. His point was that it wasn't bovine, these were divine. Any reference to...
That's good.
Well, I wish I could take credit for it, but Dr. Miller, he's the one who came up with that. Hence, and his wordplay clearly evident in the title.
The bovine assembly.
We have a bovine assembly in the pasture out back.
I know we do, but I would argue that the bulls of Bashan lead their own, if you want to call it a bovine. But yeah, it is an infernal realm.
Infernal council, right. And that was the point. And this is the point of the references to Bashan that we see sprinkled throughout the Bible. This was something that was well known to the Hebrew prophets and to the apostles, so it didn't need to be made explicit every time, which is why, sadly, in the modern day, since we've lost that cultural and religious frame of reference, we see these, yes, they must have raised cattle in ancient Bashan. Well, no, that's not what was going on there. And so when we see in Psalm 68, the passage beginning at verse 15, O mountain of God, mountain of Bashan, O many-peaked mountain, mountain of Bashan, a reference to Mount Hermon, which was believed to be the location of the divine assembly of the pagans, or the infernal assembly.
Yes, exactly. And you teach on this. In fact, you just taught on this as you're watching this, because we're returning from Israel. And we had the honor of hearing Dr. Heiser teach on this at Mount Hermon in 2018.
Right, and explain why this was so important. This was believed to be the home of the Canaanite creator god El, his consort Asherah, and his 70 sons. And the number 70 in the ancient world around Israel, not just for the Hebrews, represented all of them. In other words, all of the gods of the nations were the sons of the Canaanite creator god El.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Why don't we take a break and then we can come back and we'll hear Dr. Heiser.
Absolutely. Why was Hermon and Bashan important? That's ahead on Unraveling Revelation. For December, we're offering every DVD in our online store for just $10. That's right. $10 for any DVD in our store. That includes collections of our teachings like This is War and Unmasking the Ancient Gods, The Four Horsemen, where we identify the fallen angels who ride in Revelation chapter 6, our travelogumentaries of our trips to Israel, Wars of the Gods Volume 1, Search for the Titans, and Wars of the Gods Volume 2, Search for the Rephaim, What Lies Beneath, a jaw-dropping discussion with Dr. Aaron Judkins about the influence of the fallen watchers on Göbekli Tepe, the Best of Sci Friday Volumes 1 and 2, and the 13-part video teaching series based on the book The Second Coming of Saturn. We'll even include The Unseen Adversary, an MP3 CD with 7 hours of audio interviews with Bible scholar Dr. Michael S. Heiser. Every DVD in our store, just $10 plus shipping and handling during December, only at gilberthouse.org/store. Welcome back to Unraveling Revelation. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I am Sharon Gilbert, and we mentioned earlier that Build Barn Better is a project we are really involved in, and we've lived here for 8 years. But only now, this year, has the Lord said, now I want you to do this. He's given us a really nice sort of starting fund to get the early stages done. But if he calls you, if he places it upon your heart to donate $1 or more to Build Barn Better, you can go to gilberthouse.org/donate. And if you want to put a note there saying, this is for Build Barn Better, that's great. And many of you have already done that. And some of you have actually offered to donate materials toward Build Barn Better. So we just want to thank you. We're amazed at what the Lord is doing.
We are humbled. We're going to do this very simply. We just want to insulate, run power around, and put HVAC in there. And then from there, we'll use some kind of homespun.
We're homespun. We can't help it.
Yeah, we recycle and reuse, and we will do that as we put it together. We're not looking to build a fancy studio.
No.
Just a place.
I want used furniture. I want a really casual look.
Something that looks very homey. And so again, if you can contribute, we certainly would appreciate it. But more importantly is just getting the information out there. And as we talked with Dr. Michael Heiser in July of 2021, I wanted him to explain to us why this region, Bashan and Mount Hermon specifically, were so important in the ancient world. Mike, for people not familiar with Mount Hermon, what is it and why is it important to understanding Christian theology?
Yeah, Mount Hermon is the place where in Enochian literature and other Second Temple Jewish literature, that the Watchers, the biblical term for them would be the sons of God of Genesis 6, descend from heaven and, launch into their transgression of the boundaries between heaven and earth and decide to corrupt humanity. So it was one of those places that became kind of ground zero for supernatural evil. I mean, its own location is in the region in the Old Testament that used to be known as Bashan, which in Canaanite was known as Bathan, which means serpent. This region had a couple gateways to the netherworld, according to Canaanite Ugaritic texts. This is not where you want to go on vacation. I mean, it just had a supernaturally sinister reputation. And the reason why it's important, in the Old Testament, we have like Psalm 68, where the psalmist is speaking to Mount Bashan, the mountain of God, or the mountain of wannabe. And, he says, why are you so jealous of the mountain that God has chosen for his own, which is Sinai? So there's this rivalry between Hermon and Sinai. And if you keep reading in Psalm 68, this is the mountain where the psalmist said that God is going to conquer this place and, bring the captives in his train and bring them back, from the sea, which is a chaos lingo. And it's the passage Paul quotes in Ephesians 4, the old captivity captive, passage, that part of what Christ accomplishes is to defeat, again, cosmic evil forces. And, if he's quoting Psalm 68, he has Bashan in view. And so he's nullified their authority. He's taken them captive. He is Lord over them. He is going to, God is going to be the Lord of this place, this place of darkness. It's a conquest, statement in Ephesians 4 that is very, easily linkable to what we think of in a bigger picture as spiritual warfare. I mean, Jesus goes to this region. We have the gates of hell passage in Bashan. And then 6 days later, they go up into a very high mountain. Well, there's only one there. That would be Mount Hermon. And what happens there? It's the transfiguration. So why does Jesus pick this region and this place, this mountain, to do this stuff? In my view, as I'm known for in Unseen Realm, is he's going there to pick a fight. He's going there to provoke. He goes to Caesarea Philippi, again, right there at the foot of Hermon. And this is where, we get thou art, you're Peter, and you're, I'm going to build my church on this rock, and the gates of hell will not be able to withstand it. This is where he does it, right in view of this place. And it's a threat. It's a smackdown. I mean, Jesus goes there And he is really trying to provoke the enemy because he knows the clock is ticking. I mean, we're not that far removed when he does this from his own, crucifixion. So it's a spiritual warfare place, both in terms of darkness and also in terms of Jesus challenging it and defeating it, because he defeats the Lord of the underworld. Okay, I'm going to build my church. Essentially, I'm going to turn the gates of hell, okay, into Satan's tomb in effect. And he goes to Hermon to be transfigured, and he reveals who he is, as if to say, well, here I am, like, do something about it, So he does these provocative things, and as soon as he's done with them, the Gospels say, from this time forth, Jesus began to teach his disciples that he needed to go to Jerusalem and die. And they get freaked out, but like, that's the plan. So he needs to get the ball rolling here. It is time to enact, God's plan. And so he goes and picks a fight. They go to Jerusalem. They have the triumphal entry, and a week later, he's dead. And there we go.
As Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 2, verses 6 through 8, that if the archons or the rulers of the age had understood what was going on, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. Now, as we said in the previous segment, when Jesus in the Spirit descended into the abyss and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, is it possible that they thought, because they realized, okay, he is the Son of God and he's fully human now, he's vulnerable.
He's vulnerable.
Maybe did they think that they could get away with actually, as in the parable?
I do. I do think Satan and other forces, they thought this was the solution to the dilemma. I don't have this in Unseen Realm, but I think Jesus' temptation scene is really important for this, because when he's propelled by the Holy Spirit to go out into the wilderness, which of course is the domain of chaos in the Old Testament, and he has this conversation with Satan. We're familiar with, Satan tries, 3 tests or 3 temptations, and Jesus responds with Deuteronomy, and we get all that. But what we kind of miss is one of those tests. Satan whips out Psalm 91 to Jesus. And Psalm 91, again, this is something we wouldn't ordinarily know, but that psalm was viewed as an exorcistic psalm by Jews of Jesus' day in that intertestamental period. We know that because at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, Psalm 91 was in the same jar with 4 other exorcistic psalms that are not in the Bible. And in the Septuagint, different versions of the text, it's a Psalm of David. And this is where we get this notion that in the intertestamental period that David and Solomon could cast out demons. This is why, because Psalm 91, if you're reading it in Hebrew, there are 4 or 5 terms there that are names of Canaanite deities. In other words, they're these demonic forces.
Right. And
so one of the verses of this psalm, Satan using an exorcistic psalm to test Jesus. I mean, think about that. It says, well, Satan says, okay, you're the Son of God, right? Yeah, I get it. Doesn't the scripture say, that, God will protect you? So why don't you just throw yourself off here, the pinnacle, of the temple or this mountain? And, if you're the Son of God, you should be okay. Now, why is he doing it? Well, let's say that Jesus says, yeah, I am the Son of God, so watch. He hurls himself. If the psalm is accurate, lest the angels will bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone. What has Satan learned? Well, guess we can't kill him.
Yeah. Oh,
So I think he's fishing for information.
Never considered that. Very interesting.
And Jesus cannot put this card on the table, because that's exactly what has to happen. He must die. So if he succumbs to this trick, this fishing expedition on Satan's part, Satan has just learned a valuable thing. In fact, he's learned the thing that would be the most damaging to the whole program working. And basically, Jesus tells him to take a walk, on a short pier, like thou shalt not put the Lord your God to the test. He just cuts the conversation right there. Like, you're not gaining any information here. Sorry, I'm not falling for this.
Fascinating. Now, the importance of Mount Hermon in the Enochic literature as the site of the Watchers' rebellion, we're familiar with that from the Jewish perspective. What did the pagans around ancient Israel, absent Bashan, we know that the lowlands at the foot of Mount Hermon were considered an evil place. But what was the significance of Hermon to the Canaanites and the Amorites?
Yeah, I mean, this was considered the mountain of the gods, the home base of the council of the gods in back at Sumerian and Mesopotamian religion. So this was the seat of their authority, the seat of the gods. So it's no surprise that it would continue to be perceived as, again, kind of the vortex, if you will, of chaos forces. I mean, this is their headquarters, and so it's something that never really goes away. I mean, even later when you get into Roman times, you've got, of course, the seat of Pan there, the cave of Pan. You've got, altars to Zeus at different times, and Zeus, of course, claims to be most high, in Greco-Roman authority. So you've got this attachment to this place, not only the region, but specifically the mountain of Hermon, in a number of ancient pagan religions that really, again, considers it their chief base of operations.
It's fascinating that in 1869, Sir Charles Warren discovered a stela in a temple on the summit that was written in Greek, dedicated to those who swore an oath. A reference to the Watchers of
Sounds familiar.
It does.
Yeah, it shows that well into the Hellenistic period, people are aware of what the place is. They're aware of the stories and the traditions and how this ties in with biblical stuff. But I'm hoping that people listen to this. One of the things they really take away is the fact that we don't know this stuff. Again, to somebody in the ancient world, if you just said, "Hey, let's go up to Bashan for some R&R," this weekend, they're going to look at you like you're insane. No, it's a spooky place. It's foreboding. It's evil. Again, they're going to be used to these ideas, and then when things happen there, especially when it's Jesus or some other spiritual figure, this is going to spell spiritual warfare to them. But these things are basically meaningless to us unless we take the time to get into their world, and have that fixed in our minds when we read Scripture.
This is, again, knowledge that's been lost over the centuries.
When the Lord said that in the last days people would travel to and fro and knowledge would increase, we see people traveling to and fro, not only physically but also virtually. And virtually you can travel across the world in seconds. But knowledge has increased, not only profane knowledge from the fallen realm, but also the Lord is opening up His Word through archaeological discoveries, through texts that have been lost until now, and through teachers like Mike Heiser who have been inspired to get back into the mind of those who originally understood these things.
And that has helped us to understand what was going on in some of the stranger sections of the Bible.
The weird passages, as Mike calls them.
Right. So when we see these passages like Psalm 68 and God essentially leading a military operation against Mount Hermon, the mountain of Bashan.
Don't you love that?
Yeah, we begin to understand, the chariots of God are twice 10,000, thousands upon thousands. The Lord is among them. Sinai is now in the sanctuary. Essentially, Sinai is wherever God is. And then you ascended on high, leading a host of captives in your train. God assaulting the Mount of Assembly for the infernal council.
Oh my goodness, this beats the Lord of the Rings, which I think most of us would agree is one of the most outstanding series of films, those in The Hobbit, because J.R.R. Tolkien had a gift for showing not only character, driven plots, but he also had these great scenes of huge battles. And I could just picture it all when I was a kid. And so seeing Jackson's vision on the screen was, we went to every premiere, you and I with our daughter Nicole. But what we see in the Old Testament and the promise of the New Testament when the Lord comes back, oh boy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's nothing compared to what is really good. These films, they're nothing.
Right. And Jesus set this all up from where he based his ministry. We talked previously about him being baptized in Bashan, but he declared his divinity right there at Mount Hermon, again, the mountain that dominates this land that was believed to be the entrance to the netherworld, at Caesarea Philippi, just outside the grotto of Pan, believed to be the literal entrance to the underworld. Jesus said,
climbed a high mountain.
Yeah.
First he said
First
this,
he said yes. The gate on this rock, this 9,200-foot mountain right back here, I will build my church, and the gates of hell, which is this big cave right over here, I will build my church. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. And then 6 days later, he climbed the mountain and was transfigured. So he essentially declared his divinity to his followers at the base of the mountain and to the rebellious spirits when he climbed the mountain that was supposed to be their headquarters.
Can you imagine that? He had not yet declared that he was going into Jerusalem, hadn't put his face that way, but he lit up the world. He lit it up into the supernatural realm and said, here I am.
Yeah. What are you going to do about it? And then when he came down, according to the Gospel of Luke, he sent out the 70 or the 72, depending on your translation. But numerically or numerologically, it means the same thing. Jesus was saying, okay, look, fallen realm, you think you, the gods of the nations, dominate this world? My 70 disciples are more powerful than you. And a day is coming when humanity, those who accept me as Lord and Savior, will replace you in the divine council.
That's one of the reasons that the fallen realm hate us so much, because their foolishness lost them those places in the divine council. We will replace them. In fact, I would argue, and I think there's evidence, that we were designed to be part of it originally.
Yes.
And these elder brothers, the angels who fell, didn't like that. They were jealous.
Yeah, God has given this earth to them for their dominion. Yeah, that's why Jude writes that the ones who fell, the angels who sinned, left their proper dwelling. They kept not their first estate.
Exactly.
They weren't created to occupy and have dominion over this world. We have been. And this and the teaching of Dr. Heiser and understanding how Genesis 6 fits together with the New Testament and end times prophecy shows it is all integrally, I never get that word right.
Yes.
Integrally.
It integrates with it.
It's connected. You cannot separate it. And that's why we want to bring you these series of interviews with our good friend.
There's one more next week.
One more. Until then, thank you for watching. This is Unraveling Revelation.
Unraveling Revelation is a viewer-supported outreach of Gilbert House Ministries. We'd love to hear from you. Contact us through our websites or drop us a line at P.O. Box 78, Crane, Missouri 65633.